you think sometimes when you go through doors of anxiety, doors that you don't know what's on the other side of that door. Let's say it's a reunion, or let's say there's an argument and you're walking through the door to see a family member, or you're walking through the door when you've had a biopsy, or you're walking through the door to meet your college roommate for the first time. And when we put a mezuzah up, we say, listen, I know you think you're walking through this door alone, but you're actually walking with God. And we use the shin of Shaddai, God who's protecting you, and the Shema, which is the mission statement of the Jewish people. You're walking through, you've got the entire force. The force is absolutely with you when you walk through the door.
Hello there, I'm Tanya Khazanov, and you are listening to Human and Holy. Today's episode is a conversation with Dr. Erica Brown, who is the Vice Provost for Values and Leadership at Yeshiva University and the founding director of its Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks-Herenstein Center for Values and Leadership. She is the author of 12 books on leadership, the Hebrew Bible, and spirituality. Erica has a daily podcast called Take Your Soul to Work, and has a couple recent books, one of them being Esther, Power, Faith, and Fragility in Exile, which is something that was part of our discussion today. She has been published in the New York Times, The Atlantic, First Things, and the Jewish Review of Books, and wrote a monthly column for the New York Jewish Week. This woman is a brilliant scholar and one who really brings her heart to the work that she does. I have read quite a few of her books and enjoyed every single one, and it was such an honor to have this conversation with her tonight to share with you. We spoke about Esther, the heroine of the Purim story, and Mordechai too, and what we have to learn from them at this current moment in time as we face something that seems pretty similar that we're going through in the diaspora. We also spoke about Jonah and this desire to run away from leadership or from our responsibilities or God's calling to us, and how to swivel around and face the fear, find the support that we need in order to step up to the callings that God is asking of us. We also speak about Erica's love of Tanach, how she got engaged with Tanach, how she weaves all of her many interests and readings within her work and her writings. This was such a precious conversation to me, a real masterclass on how Jewish history is not just a storybook, but an instruction to where we need to go right now and how to take responsibility and to really walk with God in our days. Thank you, Erica, for making this time, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Human and Holy. I'm so excited to have you here today. I've read so many of your books. You're such a role model to me in so many ways as a Jewish woman who is just so deeply engaged with her Judaism in so many different ways. I see how your mind and heart are both engaged. So I'm really excited to get to have this opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you. It's really delightful to be with you.
I would love if you can share anything about yourself that you would love to share, something that you're curious about or interested in. Tell us a little bit about who you are as a person.
Oh gosh, that's such a big question. I would say that I know most people define themselves by what's on a piece of paper, but I think for me, I define myself through my relationships. As a wife, as a mother, as a grandmother, as a friend. Friendship is very important to me. And I think when you're busy, when work takes up a lot of your life, your friends have to become a hobby. You have to invest in them, and I think you lose the bandwidth for some, but you intensify the connection and bond with others. So I would say I define myself through those relationships. I think that's how our identities are really formed.
I love that way of self-identifying. I think that's beautiful. And obviously as an adult, it takes effort. What do you do to invest in your friendships as a hobby?
I would say, that's really what I do for the most part in my downtime. I may have, I'm a big reader and I paint actually. But I would say that that's the baseline, and that, I think the question of identity is always, what do you drop everything for? And you could see some people do that for a work call. But if a friend needs me, then, it's like, oh, do you have time? And you just figure out where you can make time.
That's what you do it for. Yeah. I like that barometer. What do you drop everything for? So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about some of your work. Specifically, I want to talk about Esther, which I have it right here. And I see your beautiful line of books behind you as well. They have a strong stamp because we are living in a time that feels, you mentioned in the end of your book how Esther is a story that constantly gets evoked throughout Jewish history as we experience persecution, or specifically the Holocaust. You saw the like Megillas Hitler, which I thought was like so striking, because as I was reading your book, I kept reading Haman as Hamas unintentionally, because like that's a word that has been coming up a lot recently. And I was curious to hear from you about the Purim story, especially leading up to Purim, Esther as a character. What can we learn from her on how to show up as Jewish people in the moment that we're living in?
Yeah, I mean it's a really important question, and I think when ancient books come to life, you also look to them not only to describe your reality, but to actually change your reality. And I think that's where Esther maybe does its most potent work, where there's this decree that and and you feel that, and it comes from above, and it's very authoritative, and it's very cruel, right? Even this small detail of Achashverosh and Haman making the decree and then sitting down to have a meal. We actually have a similar scene in Joseph when Joseph's thrown into the pit and the brothers eat a meal. There's a certain way that the Torah shows us rather than tells us the callousness. And I think when you're living in a time of callousness, and certainly October 7th, the brutality, the savagery, the almost incredibility at the lows, at the depravity, I have a very similar feeling of feeling out of control and reading the news. And I've been to Israel 5 times since October 7th. It's just, um, it feels so much larger. The situation feels so much larger and more grave than anything we could imagine. And certainly anything that's happened to our people, at least in my lifetime. My mom is a child survivor. My grandparents are survivors. So this is a story that's sort of deeply embedded in my narrative DNA, so to speak. And then I think to myself, I understand the heroism of a Mordechai. I understand the sort of playing on how much you reveal your identity and how much you conceal your identity. And we're seeing that with diaspora Jewry today, where people feel, can I wear the star out? Can I wear my kippah, my yarmulke on my head? Do I feel comfortable saying I'm a Jew in my office? Do I feel comfortable saying I'm a Zionist? Is that going to label me in my workplace? I mean, you're watching people ask these questions, and then you say, here's Mordechai, who at the time of annihilation goes to the gate of the king, and he is in sackcloth and ashes, and that is not permitted, and he does not care, and he's Berachov Ha'ir. And one of the things I play with a lot in the book is the staging of the book of Esther. So Mordechai is very often in the gate of the king, and that's how he hears things happen. And I think it's symbolic and emblematic of Jews generally. We're sort of in the gate. We're inside and we're outside. We're not fully in and we're not fully out. And yet in that place, you get a lot of information. That's how he unravels a conspiracy theory, because he's in the right place at the right time. He hears people come backwards and forwards. It's this liminal place. And at the same time, in this particular scene, he goes forth into the middle of the street. He understands when you have to hide and when you have to make things known, and when you stand on conviction and say, not my people, not now, not ever. And his job in the moment is to say, who do I need to bring in to this picture? Who needs to stand with me in this conviction? I'm standing on one side of the palace and you're inside the palace. I can do my work outside the palace. You need to do your work inside the palace. And I think that distribution of responsibility, and the fact that Hashem, God's name, isn't in the book at all. So the sense is, you live your life as if God is always with you, but you act in the world as if you're the only one. And it is all dependent on you. This is what it means to have agency and empowerment, is to believe. And by the way, I think it's very powerful that it's male and female, older and younger, because there's no sense that I'm too young for this, or I'm too old for this, or I'm only a woman, or I'm only, or I'm only a Jew. When you see injustice, when you see unfairness, when you see persecution, then you realize, this is my job. My job isn't to have a nice house and a 2-car or 3-car garage, my job is staring at me in the face, which is to defend my people. And I hope we read it through that lens. I hope we read the Megillah through that lens, because I think it's asking us to read it through that lens.
I love how you said that and brought that in, like not to be reading our current time and experiences as a Megillah that we have no agency over, but to really see like how we can participate in the story, because instinct sometimes is to just kind of like watch it all unfold in front of us and not to feel like we have any agency or participation in how things will go. I'm curious if there is a specific direction, like when you say standing up for the Jewish people or standing in that gate and like doing something with information that you hear, what is it do you think that we can do? Like how can we step up to be Mordechai or Esther in our time?
So, I mean, I've been asking myself this question a great deal. Monday is the 500th day of the war, and I think a lot about that. And that number is so inconceivable that there are people, in tunnels in Gaza beneath the ground who are starving and who've been neglected and tortured, and there's soldiers who have been on reserve duty multiple times, 200 days, 250 days. You say to yourself, what is my role? What should I put myself on the front lines of right now? And I think in the beginning of the war, it felt relatively easy. It was shocking, but there was this sort of sense that we have to feed people and we have to take care of people and we have to equip soldiers and we have to send money and we have to send goods and we have to send ourselves. And I think now it's harder. One of my students just said to me this week, I was thinking about the fact that, we haven't had a rally in a long time, right? That was in November. That was only a few weeks after the war broke out in Washington. So where are we now? Right? Where are the protests now? Now we're sort of almost allowing the governments of different countries to take on these roles, which they have to do, because the solution is going to come from there. But the one-on-one solution of what are we going to do to rebuild? It's the shovel, it's the checkbook, it's the saying, you guys did this fighting, you were in this, and now we're going to take care of all the mental health issues that will take literally decades to work on, right? And who's gonna cover the cost of that? I think that's on us in a lot of ways. I do.
Yeah. I hear that like that we have had a certain shift towards in a way becoming more like bystanders in the situation. Like we were mobilized
Or
very quickly. Right.
normalizing what shouldn't be normal,
Exactly.
simply because it's been 500 days.
Right.
It's been such a long time.
So how do you continue to like hold that?
I wrote a book called Morning is Broken, about faith after October 7th. And I think relationships that we have with each other and with God, they're not static,
Yeah.
they're dynamic. And there are days where it's really hard. I try to pray, I pray 3 times a day, and sometimes it's easier, and sometimes the words flow, and sometimes the tears flow, and sometimes the sense of, can I pray for the recovery of this person? Will this person ever come home? And then sometimes it's harder. Sometimes it feels harder. And so part of that is, how do you modulate yourself so that prolonged despair doesn't distance you from what you really care about? And that's hard. That is hard.
And what do you think the antidote to that is?
I think a lot of it comes from your human connections to people in Israel, and how often you're in touch with them,
Interesting.
and you're checking in to see how they're doing. Is there, do they have a child serving? How are their families? So I think that's a piece of it. I actually, in the beginning, I felt that the news was really important, and keeping up with the news, which I of course do, uh, is sort of a way to stay connected to the everyday slight changes and sometimes more serious changes. But I do think that the news can be itself create a vehicle of passivity, right? My job is reading about what's going on, as opposed to saying there's something else to be done. And I think we've actually taken a back seat on some of the charitable efforts. We were sending Purim baskets, and we were sending Passover food, and and now, like, we're in another cycle of holidays. And where are we? Have we lost? They're still fighting this. We're like, what are we doing? So I'm asking myself those questions. And I think we've lost some activation energy that we have to get back. And I think when you read the Purim story, you see activation energy.
Activation energy. That's amazing. It's such a perfect way of putting it because they didn't just sit back and pray or just read the news or like, let's see how this all unfolds, but they really took this active role in changing what happened. And there was a quote there that really stood out to me when you spoke about the people in the diaspora and how so much of living in the diaspora is trying to remember who you're supposed to be and what your values should be. And I think there's been a bit of an awakening around that. Do you think there's something related there to that like personal Jewish awakening that has happened around these difficult times?
I think for some people it's an awakening, and it's a powerful awakening. It's a powerful awakening about Israel. You know, many people I speak to, well, I actually am going to visit, or I'm making aliyah. Right, I've had many conversations with wonderful students at Yeshiva University. I think they thought about going to Israel, and now they really think about going to Israel, and now they're preparing to go. And I think we've seen some of yeah, I think we've seen some of those changes. But I do think for a lot of American Jews, there's confusion as to what Judaism really, there's confusion about their Zionism. For some people, it's crystal clear. It's never been clearer. The sides have never been clearer. And I think a lot of that is who were you before October 7th will determine who you were after October 7th. I will say, I think that there are people who don't feel that they belong to American society in quite the same way, and they want to connect to Judaism, but they don't have the language. They're not structurally Jews in the sense that they belong to organizational, they belong to organizational Jewish life, whether that's a synagogue or a JCC or some kind of, group that deals with Jewish social services. And I think that there's a moment here for those who care about Jewish unity and Jewish growth, um, to reach out to people who are confused about their Judaism and say, "Come, sit with me at my Shabbat table, near my Shabbat lights, near my chicken soup. Let's talk about where you are right now in life. Let's talk about meaning." I think there's a hunger for this meaning and wonder, and I think, this expression, "You never let a good crisis go to waste." And as a Jewish community, if we let this go to waste, these feelings that people have where they don't really know how to reach out, so we have to reach out. And I think there are Jewish outreach organizations that are particularly good at this, and I think most of us really aren't.
Yeah. Well, again, it's back to being in that position. Like if you're in that position and you're actively see yourself that way and are doing it, it's one thing, but it's another thing to like meet someone at the grocery store, at the gym, or when you're out and about and to say like, oh, I see a spark in them and I'm going to invite them to participate in their Judaism in my
Yeah,
own life, my personal life.
yeah, but nothing beats the power of invitation. All right, and you don't know where someone is at the moment where you say, "Hi, would you like to join me?" Or, "I'm going to a class," or, I'm baking a challah. Would you like to come over? Now, they might say no, but they still feel like, "Wow, you saw me. I feel seen."
Yeah, it sparks something for them. Well, something I see all the
Yeah.
time is being in public and like Jews like to turn themselves into you if you're visibly Jewish. They'll say like shalom
Mm.
or like chodesh tov or something just to tell
Yeah.
you like
Yeah.
I'm one of the tribe.
My husband was a practicing ER physician for a long time, and sometimes someone will come in to the emergency room where everyone's waiting. They'll go, "Shalom, doctor," right? They say a yarmulke, "Shalom, doctor." What they're really trying to say is, "Hi, yeah, I'm a Jew. Also, do I have to wait this whole line?" Right? Like, we're family. We're family.
What they're really trying to say is, yeah, can you speed
Yeah,
this
but
up?
you do have to wait the whole line. You're
Yeah.
you're gonna have to wait.
I would love to talk a little bit more personally. You've written countless books on many topics, and it seems like you have like a specific focus on Tanakh. And I'm curious to know like how your interest started within studying Tanakh, writing about Tanakh in like such an intense, deep way.
Oh, that's very kind of you. They're not countless books. They're, I can count them. I can count them. Yeah, no, no, I just want to, not. I mean, for me, the writing is a form of learning, and it's the very, very deep form of learning. Teaching is a very deep form of learning for me. Writing is a much deeper form of learning because I'm always revising. Writing is the easy and pleasurable thing. It's the revision, it's the editing, it's the does this make sense? Is this 100% clear? Is have I used too many words? So I think it's writing is a way of seeing the world and thinking. And then when you take on top of that this book that has determined the flight path for Jews, right? The spiritual flight path for Jews for millennia. And when I get involved in a book, right now I'm working on two different Tanach projects, and just the chance to go very, very deep in a pasuk, in a verse, and then notice changes in language or a particular word, or why does this appear next to that. It's a really, the interpretive process is amazing. Is this joke that Rashi's wife says, she's in the kitchen with Rashi, and he says something like, "Why are you wearing that hat and that dress?" And she says, "Do you always have to comment?" Right? I think we're commentators and interpreters of our lives. And so when you take the interpretive tradition of saying what's on the surface, what's the text, the pretext, the subtext, the context, all of that makes the text bigger. And then you have to decide, when you're a writer, you're writing for your readers, so you have to say, well, what would a reader be interested in? And that's always speculative. I just never know.
Being a reader is such an intimate experience. It really does feel, when I read someone's book, like like I am sitting there with them. Like they're writing only
you're in
to
conversation.
me.
You're absolutely in conversation.
Yeah.
And you make a contract with your reader to say, if you're gonna spend the money on a book and spend the time. For me, it's the time, because I don't particularly make money on books. But when you say, I'm going to spend the time to read this, and then you say, well, I have to make a commitment to you to have worked hard on this, so that I'm worthy of your time. And I don't know if I am. I think that's a question that authors have to ask. I certainly ask it all the time.
Which is like such a respectful way of looking at your readers. And as a writer, you're a Jewish woman, and I know for some women feel that like they're just purely scholars. I know that you do a lot of work in like Jewish women's leadership and empowering Jewish women. Do you feel that there is anything unique that you bring to your study by being a woman, or not particularly?
It's very hard for me to say, because I'm only myself. I don't, I think we bring the entirety of ourselves to every text that we learn. So I can say that I probably thought differently about certain subjects before I was a mother, and probably before I was a grandmother, and probably before several friends passed away, right? Because I think death also affects the way that you see the world. Loss affects the way, joy affects the way. So I think, you bring the totality of yourself to a text. And when people would say, oh, I studied that particular thing last year, but you're, the beauty of Judaism is that we cycle through text, because the text, quote unquote, stays the same, but we don't. So when you read a text, it's interesting when you read a text like the book of Jonah, which I've written on. When you read that text and you're a child, so you think, oh, this is a story about a fish, right? A man gets eaten by a fish, and the fish, there's all these pictures of the whale, and you come home from school and you've got it. When you're a teenager, you're thinking, wow, I got to run away. I don't like running away from my parents. I'm running away from God, right? I got to find myself, right? When you're an adult, sometimes you think, I want to be a fugitive from the responsibilities that I have. And there's almost like a wishful fantasy. Ann Tyler wrote a book called Ladder of Years, where this family is on a beach, and two children and a husband, and they're having a nice time. And the mother just walks away as if she's going to the restroom, and she walks out of her life. Now, that's like a fantasy for a lot of people. And then she's like, well, what's going to happen? Are they going to find her? Is they going to, and when I read that novel, I thought, oh, this is just a, interpretation of Jonah, right? There's people, when they're in a life, and then you build a life, and then the construct doesn't work for you for whatever reason. And then you try to, can you escape from that? Or do you have to say, maybe I can come back on different terms? But I think when you read these texts, you're reading them, you're mediating them through very different eyes, developmentally.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful, wholesome way of responding to that question. And I was really struck by your use of Jonah's story in your book on leadership, on spiritual leadership, and that desire to like abnegate responsibility when you're put in a position where you see that you can be a leader. When someone is in that position where they feel like they're kind of running away from God's calling to them, Like, what can bring you back if you feel like it is too heavy or it is too much? Just like honing in on Jonah's story for a minute, because it's a powerful one.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm so honored that you've read a bunch of books, and it's nice to have a book conversation. I don't have enough of those in my life. So when I wrote Inspired Jewish Leadership, which is my first published book, I told the story in the book which was true, and it's so outrageous that I'm going to repeat it. I was doing my PhD, and I was living in Boston at the time, and I was teaching in New York, and a cab driver picked me up, an elderly he was an elderly gentleman. I don't know exactly how old he was, but and it was very early in the morning. He was very chipper, and he said, "Where are you going today, ma'am?" And I said, "I'm going to Logan Airport." And he said, "What airline?" And I said, "Well, what do where are you going?" And it was a little bit border on the nosy, and I was a little tired, but I just went along with it. And he said, "Well, what are you doing in New York?" And I said, "I'm teaching." He goes, "Well, what are you teaching?" And I was like, "Oh, am I going to go here? Am I going to talk about teaching Bible?" So I can't remember. I think I said I'm going to teach. Uh, Maybe I said Jewish history actually at the time because I wasn't sure if I could say Bible. I don't know. And he said, "What period?" And I go, "What period?" So, oh, okay. I said, "Well, 16th century." So then he says, "Well, are you?" I must have said Jewish history, and he said, "Well, are you familiar with the works of?" And he mentioned Gershom Shalom and a few other, very noted scholars. And I said, "Okay, it's my turn to ask you some questions. I've never had a taxi driver who's familiar with the works of one of the great scholars of mysticism. So tell me a little bit about you." And he was a rabbinical student. And he was a rabbinical student, and he was in his last year, and he interned, I think, at a synagogue in New Hampshire. And he loved the study part of it. But when people asked him questions about life, you give your sermon and then you come down to the pews. And then in the pews, this one is sick and doesn't know where God is. And this one's getting a divorce. And this one, and then you deal with the mess that is human life. And that really scared him. And he went home to Chicago, and it's amazing. I actually didn't miss my flight tonight. I was just intrigued by the story. And he said, I called my friend. I went home and I called my friend and I told him I'm just not going to be a rabbi. And he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, why don't you drive a taxi like me?" And he said, I don't know how to drive." And the friend said, "I'll teach you how to drive." And he's been driving a cab for 40 years. 40 years. And it was clear that he had a love of things, but there was something that frightened him. And when you think about Jonah, there was something that frightens you. And you could take the Eleanor Roosevelt, like every day do something that scares you. But that's a little bit pat. It's hard for people to do what is the most frightening and the most difficult. As many times as you can, you know, self-talk yourself into something, or talk yourself into something rather. And I think to myself, that friend who said, "Well, he didn't know how to drive," but the friend said, "I'll teach you how to drive." And what he could have done is gone back to rabbinical school and said, "Wow, I am overwhelmed. I don't really know what I should do. Could you help me?" And I think that's part of asking for help when you're stuck and you don't know. So when you're saying, well, what do you do? I think you find a few trusted allies and mentors. It's really important to have a mentor. I tell this especially to women, because I think it's hard. It's hard to. It's a man's world. It's still, um, not forever, but still. And I think you need people who show you. So how do you manage a family and manage your career and manage other things in your life? Like, I mean, I think these things are hard. And what's harder still, because you brought up the Book of Esther, is saying, I actually want to lead. I'm doing more than just managing. I want to actually do something that changes the world in some way. I want to make a dent in the universe. I want to save something that's important. So you need to ask questions, and you need the people who are going to hold your hand to get you through it.
Mm. The visual of the cab driver is unbelievable. It is hard to, like, I read that story and I was like, oh, it was such a powerful visual. Even though I know it's a real story, it's also just an incredible metaphor for our own experiences of, like, I've had moments in my own life where I'm like, I should just become a cab driver. I should become like a grocery
Yeah,
clerk, like,
right. Oh, for sure. It's like, oh, well, if I did this, if I worked manually, I remember I was working, my husband and I went to Kohelet in Israel to volunteer, and we volunteered in a mushroom packing factory because a lot of people were on reserve duty. And I thought to myself, all I have to do is put 100 grams of exotic mushrooms in this styrofoam tin. And it was so enjoyable for a few hours because that's all you can think about, and you have to get it right. And I thought, wow, I have not been thinking about the state of the world. I'm just thinking about these mushrooms and the weight of these mushrooms. And it's very focusing when you're in a knowledge economy to say, I'm going to do something that's like an assembly line and say, I don't want all this responsibility. Who signed? Well, none of us signed up for this. During COVID, it was really interesting, Tanya. I worked with a lot of people during COVID who, in their leadership roles, who said, I didn't sign up for this. I don't know how I'm going to make payroll. I don't know how you take an organization that's based on people and put it on a screen. I don't know how to teach online. I don't know how, right? And and this expression, I didn't sign up for this. And I think, I don't mean to be crass about this, but you didn't sign up for life either. Someone else signed you up here, right? It was someone else put you in the world, and you're here now. And leadership is what you didn't sign up for, ultimately.
Wow. Oh, I need a second for that. No, it's really powerful. Have you ever experienced this fear that you're describing in your own life? If it's not too
Oh,
personal.
every day, every day.
Every day.
No, every day. I mean, I think when you work with people and people are complicated, Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Hell is other people," but joy is also other people. And I think there's all kinds of questions you ask. How do I handle this particular situation? Did I handle it well? Oh, I just like if I could just go to sleep right now. There's times I could just go to sleep right now, and just take myself out of this. And I think if we didn't feel that, we're probably not caring enough. Probably not caring enough. I think of all the times that Esther, you know, it's an amazing thing that Esther said, I'm going to fast for 3 days, and I want you also to fast for 3 days. And we fast just for one day, right? And we're all weak, and then we have to have a big bagel dinner or whatever it is. But when you think about what she was saying is, I'm going to do something that's very, very perilous. And you're not going to be able to understand that unless you take on a little bit of my danger. Right? And I think that a lot with the situation in Israel. What does it mean in some small way to take on a little piece of the danger, right? To say, I have to carry this with you, and you knowing that I'm helping you, like, and knowing that I'm praying for you, or I'm in communication with you, or I'm supporting your family. That's a piece that helps us carry something together. Um, and Esther was smart enough to ask other people to participate. I think a lot of us are pretty lonely, especially people who take leadership roles, pretty lonely. We think we're carrying this all by ourselves. But Mordecai didn't think he was carrying it by himself. Esther didn't think she was carrying it by herself. They knew that they had each other, and that was so powerful. Most other stories, there's like one courageous leader. When there's two, and they have the same mission, but different aspects of that mission, you feel like there's nothing you can't do.
That's beautiful. And I love how you highlight Mordecai's leadership. Obviously we know it, but I think that Esther usually takes center stage in the
Mm.
thematic telling of the story and
Yes,
really
yes,
highlighting how it was a partnership. And yes, the Megillah is named for Esther, but they really partnered together in saving the Jewish people.
yeah,
And when we have that type of
yeah,
partnership, there's a lot we can do.
yeah. And she assumes a position of royalty very early on in the book, through her beauty. He achieves a position of status through his wisdom, and he brings her along. Right? He says, beauty can get you somewhere, but it just can't get you everywhere. And that's also another, Joseph also same description of physical beauty. Your beauty can open doors, but you have to go through those doors, and you have to make meaning through the doors, and that's hard. I always tell people when they have connections to someone, if I have a connection for a student, for an interview or a job, I can help open a door, but you have to walk through the door. And how are you going to walk through the door? Is your head held high? Are you warm? Are you a mensch?
Yeah.
Who are you going to be when you walk through the door?
Yeah. You can't walk through the door for them.
You can't walk through the door for them. And I always think about this. The mezuzah is a very important mitzvah to me, and it's become actually increasingly important over the war, especially all the scenes of families reuniting and going through a door. Because really, doors, for the most part, doors are really meant for one person to go through. And you think sometimes when you go through doors of anxiety, doors that you don't know what's on the other side of that door. Let's say it's a reunion, or let's say there's an argument and you're walking through the door to and see a family member, or you're walking through the door when you've had a biopsy, or you're walking through the door to meet your college roommate for the first time. And when we put a mezuzah up, we say, listen, I know you think you're walking through this door alone, but you're actually walking with God. And we use the shin of Shaddai, God who's protecting you, and the Shema, which is the mission statement of the Jewish people. You're walking through, you've got the entire force. The force is absolutely with you when you walk through the door.
Gorgeous. Yeah. Oh, and like every
I
single
see a mezuzah behind you, so like
I
if
know.
it's
And
yeah,
I'm looking at
yeah,
an Mezuzah in front of me and I'm just thinking about those like passageways of life. Like
yeah,
you highlighted so many different passageways, walking out of getting a biopsy or to get a biopsy, walking to meet your college roommates. Like doors are often like beginnings for us or
yeah.
passages, and really feeling like I'm walking through this into the next thing with Hashem by my side.
Right. And there's certain doors you walk through and you say, I'm not going to be the same person. I remember I feel like I thought this certainly when my children got married, I thought the next time I walk through this front door, I'm going to be a mother-in-law for the first time. The next time I walk through this door, I'm going to be a grandmother for the first time, right? The next time I walk through this door, um, you know, I won't have a mother-in-law anymore, right? In other words, and that's true for the way that our families grow and the way that our families experience loss, right? You go through the door and you're not the same.
Something I've been thinking about, like the nesting dolls of our identity, like as you evolve and you like have
Nice.
like all the different versions of you, and there's something lonely about it. I feel that, which is like I am not even myself. I am like a new version of myself, but that I think adds a new color to it, which is like I walk through every passageway with Hashem. So like Hashem is within every version of who I am and every
Right.
new identity that I take on. I really love
Yeah.
that.
Well, part of it is like, what is there's one doll that doesn't nest in those dolls,
Right.
right? I love those dolls, right? I love them. Yeah, but there's something about that sort of the packaging and the unraveling, and then you say, well, there's one doll that you can't open, right? It's just right. That's like the central neshama, that's the soul. That stays. That's the constant.
Yeah, there's something that you never outgrow. Truth. And it's within all of them. There's like a modern biblical commentary that I see within you that is so beautiful, where you really weave your readings on so many other topics into your commentary on the Torah and on Tanakh. And I'm wondering if you could like speak to that, or like what draws you to write about the Torah in that way.
All right. Thank you. It's organic and natural. I read a lot and I read widely. So all of that, you know, all that comes into the great funnel of thinking, and association, right? It's like, oh, so I read a poem about that, right? And then I'll say, was that right? Oh yeah, I do remember, or I'll take out a novel or there's something, from history. I had the great privilege of being a student of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who's a great mentor for me, and I just took a group of students to London to walk in the footsteps of Rabbi Sacks, and I saw his grave for the first time, which was very, very powerful and very painful. And Rabbi Sacks was a reader, and he looked at the Torah and he brought this world to it, and I think he really taught me how to think about things. Not that in any way I could compare, just as a disciple, to say you don't only learn a person's Torah, you learn the way that they walk in the world, and you observe the writing and the thinking and the sense of mission and the drive, and that made a great impression. But I'm a student. I was, as a graduate of Yeshiva University, not only an administrator and a professor there. I that that's a very comfortable world for me, the world of Torah Maggid. I don't see it as separate. I mean, I know the difference between what it means and the sanctity of the Torah, um, but all wisdom, I see it as the mediating lens for all wisdom. So it's not separate. You have to filter there. I think there's so much to filter today. I don't know if you feel that. I think the world of social media, the world of there's so many people who write books and magazines. I mean, there's just we're saturated as readers. So you have to sort of pick what you read and certainly what you write about.
How do you choose what to filter, as in, like, how do you choose what you think is like an enduring truth or beauty that you could bring into your writing on the Torah versus something that's kind of like a passing fad or maybe even unholy?
The unholiness, I have a real alarm bells for. One of the things I've been thinking I want to write about, but I'm just at the nascent stage of it, is um, the level to which people curse today, even children in Jewish schools. The language is much more crass, the way that we talk about people and situations, and there's a normalization of that kind of language, so much so that you'll have very profane words which will be on the cover of books. And so I would say that when people use certain kinds of language, like, this may be great literature, but it's just not great literature for me. Um, Situations of sexual deviance, where like there'll be novels and like I think and sometimes even classical works. It's not. I don't need to read for that. Right. So, the filtration system. I mean, I have things that I enjoy reading about and things I don't. I'm not a science fiction reader, but that's not because I think it's a waste of time. It's just not. It doesn't appeal to me in the same way. But I would say that it's hard. The filtration has to work really hard today, much harder than I ever worked, because someone else isn't filtering it for you.
Taking your kids to the library to me is a much more fraught experience than I think it was when I was a
Yes.
child. Like, there's so
Yeah.
much to navigate when you're exposing
Yeah, and
kids
there's
to the
subjects
literary world.
that frankly are inappropriate for
Yeah.
children, that they're thrown into sort of a political identity, or identity language, that identity politics they're really not at all relevant, even board books. So I think it's hard. I think we live in a really I don't know what it means to scale back. I think a lot about Cal Newport's work on slow productivity and deep work, which is we spend now so much time in offices doing shallow work, not doing the work of thought, but doing the reactive work of you could spend all day and just write emails, right? Now some of that will be creative, but most of it won't be. And then you say to yourself, okay, well, what am I here to do? What is my uniqueness? My uniqueness is not going to be in this. Yeah.
Well, we're answering emails all day, but we're also inundated with new amounts of technology that we never have been. Specifically when it comes to like AI and the way that technology is developing at a very rapid pace, I'm curious to know if you think that like these upcoming technologies are going to change the way that we study, the way that we practice our Judaism, and the way that like we write about Torah.
I mean, I can say, as a daily Safaria user, that the Torah, I can carry Torah with me in ways that I could never carry it. It is convenient to learn, right? It is not. There's nothing hard about it, right? There's not like taking a big sefer and um, that's not to say I love being in the presence of books, but I travel quite a great deal, and I want to be able to take the Torah with me. So I think that I do think that technology will change the way that we think. It's changing the way that we think. It's changing the way that we respond, or the way we feel and we need to respond. Um, I resist it a lot. On the one hand, I'm sort of an early adapter. I've written on the Torah. I would say as early as 2000, I started regular essays on the Torah that I would do virtually. So I understood that part of it. And, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, for the Lubavitcher Rebbe, technology was very important. It was a way to get out Torah. And I do think it helps in that sense. But I find it frightening. I think about my grandchildren and the technology that they have to manage. And I resent it, frankly. Why why do you keep, now I have to buy a new phone and I can't use the same plug. And there's just so much that's demanded of me as a consumer of technology. And I have to learn this. Now I have to learn AI. Why? Because my students are using AI and now I have to filter what they're doing and I have to see, or have you been, using technology? Are you allowed to use this much? It's changed teaching.
Yeah.
It's,
Already.
it's changed teaching.
You're saying needing to filter if students' work is their own?
Yeah, students' work is their own, and sometimes you actually don't even realize the boundary of. I mean, it's not always just a simple cut and paste. It's not. Technology doesn't function quite that way. So on the one hand, for me, a search engine is an act of wonder. I mean, I'm so blessed to have a search engine, so that when I have an idea and I think, oh, what could I write on that idea, and I go Google Scholar and I think, oh my gosh, look at all these articles, right? There's so much there's this ocean of knowledge that I can participate in, that I could swim in, but I can also drown in it. So that's changed the work a lot.
Well, also because now technology is generative and it's creative in a certain sense. Like it can write in
Yeah,
someone specific's voice. I'm sure if you put in like write Erica Brown essay, it could, which is awful. Like you,
really.
yes.
Oh, should I do that
You,
for my next book?
yeah. Okay, life hack.
Hi. Yeah,
Right. Peace.
that's cool.
Well, that
Yeah, I'm actually even a little afraid of that. Like that would be fun, and then also a little bit scary. Like my son-in-law said to me, he read me, I don't know, I think it was some birthday, and he read me this poem. And I go, that is so sweet. And then my husband goes, wait, did you just put that in AI? And I was like, oh yeah, okay. Right. And there's, it's hard to know when you're a writer and you're working on this and you're producing original material, what you hope is original, knowing that someone else can do that and it takes little effort. I don't know what that world would look like. Yeah.
you're just like, what's happening? You don't have a
What's
what's
happening?
happening. Yeah. I'd like to think that like there's going to be a way that we could use it in a positive, optimistic way because so much of but I don't know. That's why I'm like asking people, what do you think?
People can connect to Torah in ways they could never, never, ever, right? It's so easy to find resources now, and um, there are very few excuses, right? There are very few excuses. You can look up X on your phone, or you can look up Y on your phone. That's the choices that you're
For
making.
someone who wants to be more engaged in their Torah study, especially someone who might not have like such a deep background, what would be your suggestion for someone who wants to dive deep into the world of Torah?
Okay, so the most important thing is a teacher. It's a teacher. Ask whose classes do you go to? Like, is it online? Hopefully it's in person, and go to a class, because we believe in not only studying Torah, but embodying Torah. And when you see the embodiment of Torah, you're seeing the three-dimensional impact of what real deep Torah looks like. So that's the first thing. And especially because when you're not as knowledgeable, you want to attach yourself to someone you can ask questions to and not feel uncomfortable. So I could ask a question online and I can get an answer that I may or may not trust, but it's not the same thing as someone who knows you and who says, oh, tell me about yourself. It's not only about the question, it's the questioner. So I think the first and most important thing is to get a teacher, and the second thing is, I'm a big believer in daily Torah study. Even if it's even if you can only do 5 minutes, make that 5 minutes a constant, right? So that you go, okay, and especially if you can do it at the same time. You say, you know what, I'm gonna between 8 and 8:05 or 8:10, I'm gonna learn X. And there are books that are daily sort of books where you can read something, a page or two a day, and that's just sort of a secure anchor for you, so you just keep coming back to it. It's sort of like exercise or mealtime or other things where these are routines. I think we create spiritual routines for ourselves if we're lucky and we're disciplined, and they don't take a lot of time, but they're just I'm connected. I connect to my heart, I connect to my mind, I connect to my soul. I'm physically connected. All the ways in which you say, to have a good day, what does a good day look like? I need to nourish X parts of myself in order to have a good day. And if there's too much of one thing and not enough of another, or nothing of something, then you might say, I've been productive, but my day hasn't been meaningful enough.
Those are great. Spiritual routine and in finding someone who embodies Torah. because very often we are a little bit like swimming in the internet's vast options for Torah study, but actually finding someone that we can personally connect to that embodies Torah is a different way of studying and a different entrance
Yeah.
into it.
Deeper way of studying.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was so wonderful.
I don't know you, and you're on another coast from me, but you're just such a warm person, and I'm really very grateful to have spent this time with you.
Thank you. I so appreciate that. It was lovely to meet you, and I'm so glad to have picked your brain on a couple topics, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of your work in the future.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you loved it, and if you did, feel free to leave us a 5-star rating or review. Subscribe to our channel, our podcast, wherever you listen, so you don't miss a single one. New episodes come out every single Sunday morning. We love hearing from you and hearing your feedback, so feel free to email us at info@humanandholy.com. And if you love the work that we're doing and want to bring more of it into the world, visit humanandholy.com/sponsor. Links are in the show notes to dedicate an episode in honor of a birthday, yahrzeit, someone you love, or support us in some way. Reach out to us on how we can collaborate. Thanks for listening, and we will talk next week.